Kelechi Ez sat alone at a cafe table in Lekki, staring at 2 cups of untouched coffee, convinced the woman who was supposed to meet him had already seen him, and walked away, because who wanted a broke, tired 36-year-old widower with a 6-year-old daughter and a mountain of hospital bills still unpaid? If you believe in kindness and second chances, and in love finding people when they least expect it, tap that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs a little hope today. And subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories so you never miss a story like this one. The sun was high over Victoria Island that Saturday afternoon, spilling gold across the windows of the small cafe where Kelechi had arrived 20 minutes early out of nervous habit. A habit his late wife, Ifeoma, used to tease him about before the accident took her 3 years ago and left him, raising their daughter, Zola, alone. He had agreed to the blind date only because his sister, Chiamaka, had begged him for months, insisting he couldn't keep burying himself in double shifts at the logistics company and pretending grief was a permanent address. He wore his only good shirt, the blue one Zola had picked out that morning, while solemnly informing him that Papa needs to smile more, and he had laughed despite himself, kissing her forehead before dropping her at his mother's house and driving into town with his stomach in knots. He had been told only her first name, Adaizwan, and that she worked somewhere in fashion. 30 minutes passed, then 40. He checked his phone twice, refreshed nothing, and felt the familiar ache of rejection settle into his chest, the same ache he'd carried since the funeral, since every time he tried to explain to a woman that he came as a package deal with a little girl who still asked if her mother could see her from heaven. He decided he would finish his coffee, pay the bill quietly, and never mention this humiliating afternoon to Chiamaka again. He was reaching for his wallet when the cafe door chimed and a woman walked in, scanning the room with visible anxiety, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She was tall, dressed simply in a cream blouse, her natural hair pulled back, and there was something achingly familiar about her face that Kelechi couldn't place until she stopped directly in front of his table and said his name like a question. It was Adaize Nwosu, the same Adaize who 4 years ago had been his daughter's pediatric nurse during the worst week of his life, when Zola had been hospitalized with severe pneumonia and Ifeoma was still alive, pacing the hospital corridor at 3 in the morning while Adaize quietly brought them tea and told them gently that their daughter was strong and would make it through the night. He remembered her kindness more than her face, the way she had held Ifeoma's hand once when the machines beeped too loudly, the way she had never once made them feel like just another chart number. Adaize's hand flew to her mouth when recognition hit her too, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the cafe noise fading around them as 4 years collapsed into a single, breathless silence. She finally sat down across from him, apologizing for her lateness, explaining that traffic from Ikea had been unbearable, and then admitting, almost shyly, that she had spent the entire drive dreading that her date would be a stranger, uninterested in anything beyond small talk. She had not expected to find the widower she'd quietly prayed for many nights during that hospital week, the one whose daughter's laugh she still occasionally remembered when things got hard at work. Kelechi did not know how to feel. Gratitude and grief tangled together in his chest, because seeing her again meant remembering the worst days of his life. Yet something in her calm, steady presence made the memory less sharp, almost bearable. They talked for hours that afternoon, the coffee growing cold and forgotten between them, and he found himself telling her things he had never said aloud to anyone, how he sometimes still reached for his phone to call Ifeoma before catching himself, how Zola had started drawing pictures of Mama in the clouds, how he was terrified that loving anyone again would somehow be a betrayal of the life he used to have. Addie's listened without flinching, without offering hollow comfort, and when she finally spoke, she told him that love does not erase the people we lost. It simply makes room for them to rest while we keep living. Weeks passed, and what began as a single accidental reunion slowly became a quiet, steady friendship neither of them rushed to name. Addie's began visiting on weekends, bringing small gifts for Zola, colored pencils, a storybook about a brave little girl and her father, and Kelechi watched, heart aching in a new and unfamiliar way, as his daughter's shyness melted into open affection. Zola began asking when Auntie Ada would come again, and one evening, as Adiz braided Zola's hair on the veranda while the sun dipped low and orange over the rooftops, Kelechi stood in the doorway and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something loosen in his chest that he thought had been permanently sealed shut. But healing rarely moves in a straight line, and Kelechi's fear resurfaced violently one afternoon when his mother, meaning well but speaking carelessly, warned him that he was moving too fast, that Adiz might tire of another woman's child, that some wounds were safer left unopened. The words lodged themselves deep, and Kelechi pulled away without explanation, canceling plans, answering messages with cold, clipped replies, convinced he was protecting Zola and himself from a heartbreak he could not survive twice. Adiz did not chase him or beg for answers. Instead, she sent one message that he read at midnight, sitting alone on his balcony. She told him she understood fear, that she had watched too many families in the hospital lose everything in an instant, and that she would rather love him honestly for however long life allowed than protect herself by loving no one at all. Her words undid something in him. The next morning, daylight pouring gold across Lagos, Kelechi drove to the small clinic where she now worked, walked past the waiting patients, and found her at the reception desk, breathless and unrehearsed, apologizing for his silence and admitting the truth he had been too afraid to say away that he was terrified of losing her the way he had lost Ifeoma, and that fear had almost cost him the one person who made grief feel survivable again. Adiz did not need grand declarations. She simply reached across the desk and held his hand the way she had once held it in a hospital corridor years before, steady and unwavering, and told him that some people are given to us twice, not because life is cruel but because it is finally being kind. 6 months later, on a bright Saturday afternoon with the sun warming the small backyard of Kelechi's home, Zola ran barefoot through the grass in a yellow dress, laughing as Adiz chased her, and Kelechi stood watching them both, holding a photograph of Ifeoma he had framed and placed gently on the shelf inside, not as a wound to hide from a daisy, but as a life to honor alongside the one he was building. He understood now that love, real love, does not ask us to forget. It asks us to keep living, keep hoping, keep opening our hands even when they still remember what it felt like to lose something precious. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe that second chances are real. Because stories like Kelechi and Adiz's remind us that kindness always finds its way back to us, eventually. Before we go, if you believe fate has a way of bringing the right people back into our lives, exactly when we need them most, comment the word reunited below. I want to see how many of you believe in this kind of quiet, patient love. Kelechi Eze never imagined that a blind date arranged out of desperation would lead him back to the one woman who had already, years before, held his family together in its darkest hour. Proof that sometimes the people meant to save us have already crossed our path once, waiting patiently for the second time we're finally ready to see them.